It has traveled across time and space. An energy force unlike any in the universe. It is powerful, intelligent, and it has found the perfect planet to inhabit.
Станцимир, говорит академик Ramba Владислав Волков, прием.
Юрий, посмотри.
Станцимир?
I'm picking up a contact. 12 miles out. Speed, 0 knots. It's dead in the water, but it's big. It's really big.
Hey! Is there anyone aboard?
I don't get it. I mean, we got a Russian vessel, middle of nowhere, dead in the water. Crew vanished. I mean, why the hell would they abandon ship, huh?
Shh. You hear that?
We don't find any dead bodies.
We got somebody else on board. Repeat, we got somebody else on board. That's who sank the tug.
Drop it.
8 days ago, during a transmission from the Mir space station, something came onto the ship. It took control of computers. It was learning what? How to kill us.
Somebody welded the engine room door shut.
What is it? High-tech robotics. Get back!
Now, in order to survive,
It's creating a new life form. What?
It wants us for spare parts.
it must destroy the one threat
Oh my God.
to its existence.
I'm gonna die!
The virus called man.
What's wrong with you?
Nothing now.
Podcast Dark Horse Presents Aliens. Deactivating language censorship. Warning. Spoilers activated. Engaging.
So I've always loved and respected women. And it's one of those things, recently David Tennant gave a speech because he won an award for his outspoken positions on particularly trans rights, but broadly LGBTQ and so on and so forth. And at the award ceremony, he was like, I really shouldn't be getting an award for basic human decency, but if that's what's needed right now, I'll be happy and proud to have this award. We're living in a time where it's sad that you have to have somebody come out and say, oh yes, half the population, I'm cool with them. But I am working toward a point because specifically to comic books, I was raised by my mother and grandmother. They always supported my reading. They never had any problem with my reading comic books. There was never any stigma about it. We didn't have a lot of money, and most of my comics were bought with the change from buying my grandmother's cigarettes, which is one of those things you don't talk about when it's like, well, why don't kids read comic books anymore? Because A, kids aren't buying them granny cigarettes anymore, and B, the pocket change that's left over from doing that would not buy you jack shit anymore. You can't even get a candy bar for under $1 these days. Shit's changed, folks. Sorry. Especially when so much is free on the internet. Why would you pay for a paper comic book? Yeah. Anyway, bygones. They supported me as a comic book reader. I have one of my favorite comic book buying stories was as a kid going into, I believe it was a Walden Books. It should have been because I remember that dimness that Walden Books always had. And there were a couple of girls who thought I was so cute in my Oilers jacket that they let me pick my comic book for free. And so I took the issue of Crisis on Infinite Earths in which Supergirl died. At the 7-Eleven that I frequented for years, there was a cashier. I don't recall if she was Puerto Rican or Dominican, but I didn't realize until fairly late in our relating to one another how adorable she found me because she'd be working and it'd be quiet and she wouldn't realize that I was there going through the comic books. Now, I did not read comic books at the convenience store. That wouldn't have been proper. I wouldn't sit there and just read a comic book, but I would toss through the comic books. I might read a few sections to decide what I was going to buy. I always flipped through the books with the intention of buying something, so it wasn't a situation where I was committing a sin of promising to get something that I wouldn't get, but I'd just be quietly going through the books, and she just found that adorable, and apparently it was endearing to her. I did have access to comic book shops here and there, but one of the first places I went to for a long period of time, months if not years, was a flea market shop. And the guy who ran it, I wasn't a big fan of, but the girl who ran it, who kind of looked like Tracy Bonham, I kind of crushed on, and she was the person I bought most of my comic books from at that shop. I think that it was her influence that had me fill in for her at some of the other flea market shops when she wasn't available. A couple of times I filled in. It was disastrous. Nobody came around. I had a persecution complex where I thought they'd think that I must have been stealing from them because we made so little money. We had so little traffic. And I was like, I'm sorry, I was there, but people weren't really coming. I didn't make hardly any money. money. And they were just like, well, you know, you're a different face. People may not have wanted to get stuff from you. But I do think that she influenced my first time getting into comics retailing to any degree. Also, she let me get away with buying a couple of porno comics. I don't know if she noticed, but I kind of think it would be hard to miss. Ramba, by the way. If you know, you know. Then when I went to another comic shop a few years later, I struck up a good relationship with the woman who ran the comic section. Her husband was the namesake of the shop and ran the sports section, although he had help with that. She got sick. She needed somebody to come in to help out. He'd picked a couple of guys that he knew. She picked me. Ultimately, I ended up being the better choice as far as somebody who could consistently show up and do the work and not just goof around after school like the other guys were doing. But it was a weird situation too because, you know, I had not had a great time in school and I was not particularly socially well adjusted. And so I think that I did a lot of performative stuff for those guys, sort of ingratiate myself to them to be like one of the guys. And I didn't love doing that. I mean, it was fun. The attention was fun, but I didn't love that I felt the need to do that. I didn't feel like I needed to perform for women in the way that I was performing for guys, but there weren't any women around because unfortunately the woman I replaced ultimately passed away and I started working there full time. I ran the shop through a transition of ownership. The actual money behind that transition was the mother of a guy I'd rather not talk about, but I spent a lot of time dealing with her and we had a fraught relationship, but it was still a situation where you have a woman owning a comic shop, which was not a common circumstance. And I worked with her and I worked fairly well with her given the circumstances. I guess you could consider the November 1992 cover dated Dark Horse Comics Insider number 11 to be something of a light month, given that it had a Don Martin cover featuring a sort of Richard Simmons type wearing clown shoe size roller skates, rolling away from a giant bullseye while throwing up flowers. I don't know if it's a Cupid thing or what. On the Aliens front, you had the release of the Genocide softcover collection. On the Predator front, Race War was running in Dark Horse Presents number 68. The book offers a sneak preview of Virus. The Wan Xuan may be abandoned, but it's far from deserted. Something is alive inside the ship's computers, and it's building monstrous bodies for itself from pieces of machinery and the corpses of the hapless Chinese crew. This all-new science fiction horror series is created and written by Chuck Pfarrer, The Thing from Another World, penciled by Howard Cobb, inked by Jimmy Palmiotti, covered by Mike Plug. Virus ships December 15th, 1992, and the sequence preview is a bit of when the ship is in the storm, and then when the ship is sunk. You get a bit of the sequence where the ship's crew, the main protagonists, are on their own ship, and then later on we see that ship being sunk because of its interaction with a larger vessel that they are trying to salvage. I think mostly I got those positions because, again, I'm sort of a walking encyclopedia of comics. I'm not saying that compared to a lot of other people out there that I compete, but compared to just random person in a local area, I'm a pretty knowledgeable guy. But also, I think part of it was that since I worked with these women, you know, as a customer, and I wasn't a creep, and I wasn't a weirdo, and I knew what I was talking about, and I was respectful, I think that's part of why they wanted to have me in those roles, because if they did have to work with me at some point, I think they wanted to have somebody that they could work with. Going to the second comic shop, basically what had happened is we knew that the first shop was going to close down because of the sports side was dragging us into a hole, essentially. And specifically the son and his buying habits and his other tendencies were dragging us down. But the comics were what were keeping us afloat as long as they were. And I think that she knew that I would probably be able to bring some of the people over, not as many as I would have liked, but I did rope some of those people. And so at first I came in for a few days a week, and then slowly I became the guy. And eventually I even replaced the woman who was hiring me because she went off and did other things, and I was the one who was running the shop entirely at the end there. And I ended up displacing another woman that had worked with her, but that was sort of a weird single white female situation. So I was more agreeable as a man than a fellow woman was to her. But again, I think as a comics retailer, I was respectful. I think we were welcoming. I think we had a larger female clientele than a lot of shops because I think we showed that we were a safe place. Not over here like hitting on the girls or leering at them and stuff like that. Actively supporting their habits. You want to buy manga, you want your Sailor Moon comics, great. We'll have that here for you. Everybody's welcome here. Virus is cover feature on Dark Horse Insider number 12. The aesthetic of the entire series' covers was a stark white background, and at the center would be a bizarre biomechanical creature drawn by Mike Plug. You'd see this creature in full, but again, in nothing but negative space. Specifically, this is sort of a butterfly mosquito thing, but it's got like a wrench sticking out of it and a little camera, and then all sorts of gooey meat. The same image was used on a 10 by 27 skinny poster. Again, almost all white background. In this particular version, because they have more space, they separate the Virus logo from the biomechanoid, and they do trim the wings at tips to make it larger in the space. On the back of the poster is black and white advertisements for Outlanders, the Venus Wars 2 version, which was another Japanese import, and Caravan Kid. So again, all manga, back when Dark Horse was better known for that. 92 would have been before I was working in comics retail, but I'm very familiar with this poster, so I'm guessing there's there's probably one copy floating around one of the comic shops. That, or I just remember it from when it was up at the store itself, but I don't think so. I remember handling this thing. Those dimensions were so odd. I think the Dark Horse did a few other ones in those dimensions, but specific to Virus. I'm wondering if maybe one of my coworkers had kept that poster and maybe had it bagged with their comics. I'd have to see how those dimensions would work inside of a comic book bag and board. Dark Horse Comics had this thing called the Tip Sheet. I only vaguely remember ever seeing these things. There was a 2-issue first volume in 1991 and a second volume that ran 12 issues. I'm trying to use my comic shop as a reference, but they don't have the issue that features the exact same artwork as on the Dark Horse Insider. It's on eBay. It's a 0 issue, so it seems like that would have preceded the #1 with Aliens Colonial Marines cover. There aren't a lot of details on this thing. My recollection of it is it was sort of a miniature version of Dark Horse Insider, which doesn't really make sense. This was already a free giveaway circular. Maybe they bagged this up with the previews catalog, or it is bound into an advanced comic or something. I just remember seeing these things, and I don't remember them having much in the way of value, but apparently they decided to promote the launch of the second volume with 0 issue featuring the same Virus image as the Insider. Given how little is out there about Virus, particularly the comics, I was kind of hoping there'd be an interview in here. Unfortunately, there was not. Some other stuff out the same month: RoboCop Prime Suspect #3, the Aliens vs. Predator hardcover collection, $75 and $19.92. Softcover was $19.95, shipped December 1st. You had the first issue of Nexus Alien Justice by Barron and Rude. Rich Asala's 13 O'Clock was being solicited. It was also the back cover image. The Minotaur's Tale, a painted book by Al Davidson. It's like a graphic novel. The Residence Freak Show limited edition, $79.95. So a lot of those prestige dollars. It looks like Brian Bolin contributed, and it came with a CD. Version number 1.1, so that's why it was on the poster. The Aliens vs. Predator 2 serial by Stradley and Warner was still ongoing at this point. There's an interview with Randy Bowen on some mask-related memorabilia. Frankenstein Cold Cast figure kit based on the art of John Bolton. Don Martin signed and numbered lithograph, so that helps explain what they were promoting last month. Fat Dog Mendoza. This was the month that they started the Dark Horse International editions of Aliens with John Bolton cover covering Newt's Tale. And there's a preview of upcoming projects for 1993. But on to the solicitation copy, Virus number 104. Don't worry about catching this virus, it will catch you. With the crew of the ocean-going tug, the Electra, that's spelled Greek way, not Frank Miller way, run across an abandoned Chinese radar ship adrift in the Pacific. It seems like their ticket to Easy Street. Maritime law says they can lay claim to the ship and the millions of dollars worth of top-secret electronics on it. However, collecting on those millions is easier said than done. The Wanchuan, maybe Wanchuan, I don't know much Mandarin, may be abandoned, but it's far from deserted. Something is alive inside the ship's computers, and it's building monstrous bodies for itself from pieces of machinery and the corpses of the hapless Chinese crew. This all-new science fiction horror series is created and written by Chuck Pfarrer, penciled by Howard Cobb, and inked by Jimmy Palmiotti, covered by Mike Plug. Suggested for mature readers, $2.50 US, $3 Canada, 32 color pages, color cover, bi-monthly. Shipping December 15th, 1992. Mid-Pacific. Wind screams as a late-season typhoon flails the ocean into a nightmare of vertical water. Built for open ocean hauling, the commercial tug Electra is squat and strong, a seaworthy vessel built to last. This will be the toughest night of her life. So a dude named Hooker's at the wheel. The captain is a 30-something Weasley guy. If you've seen the movie, he is in the Donald Sutherland role, who is of course a much older guy with a pretty terrible Irish accent. A brown-haired woman comes in named Foster, who's arguing with the captain over how to proceed in the midst of the typhoon because they're taking on water and there's problems, but he's refusing to let go of their cargo, as with the movie. So this Foster is the person who is going to be played by Jamie Lee Curtis in the movie. So as we're starting, we're fairly close to what you would expect if you know the movie, and let's be honest, you probably know the movie more than you know the comic if you know either. Very strong chance that you don't know either. So you're kind of expecting the story to continue with these two characters. Well, then there's a third guy. This is the person who is played by William Baldwin in the movie. The dude in the comic does not appear to be William Baldwin though. Baldwin, good looking guy, decent shape, nothing really spectacular though. This dude that we're seeing, he's shirtless, he's a big strapping man, muscled up, he's working on equipment while other people around him are vomiting into buckets because they're so seasick. So we're letting people know this is your Sigma male. This is a guy who's hearing orders from the captain and he's completely insubordinate. He's already decided what he's going to do. Goddamn the captain to hell. This is what we need to do. In fact, he jams up the equipment so nobody else can change anything as he set the course for things. He goes up to where the captain's at. They have a big argument. The dude's like, fuck you. If I got a mutiny, I'm going to mutiny. I'm not going to die out here. Somewhat rendered moot because the barge that they're towing, cable gets fouled. Things start to break up. The captain's still wanting to refuse to let go of what they're towing. In the movie, it's because he's put all of his money, all of his resources into this. If it goes down, then his entire life essentially goes down the tubes as well. I'm guessing he loses his boat, which in the movie is they called the Sea Star, which looks really dumb dumb. Like, what a basic ass name, but he's got it on his damn hat. So the entire movie, you're reading it off his hat while he's talking his dumb Irish brogue. In the comic book, it's more a situation where he's a younger captain, and I think he's the son of the guy who owns the line. And so he's got something to prove. And so that's why he's being dumb about things and risking everybody's life. But our Sigma male, Averill, finally pulls a Brody from Jaws. He gets a hold of a canister of acetylene. He throws the damn thing many yards onto the barge. Then he shoots a flare at it and causes it to explode and sink the towed barge so they at least save the ship. Storm passes. People are kind of recovering. We're starting to be introduced to some of the other characters. There's a blonde girl named Malone. I think she's some kind of mechanic. She's not in the movie. There's a skinny white guy. There's a thick Pacific Islander dude. In the movie, they go full G.I. Joe with this guy. He's like from New Zealand. He's some kind of tribesman. He's got some sort of indigenous blade. He's got intricate facial tattoos, long hair. They might even throw a trench coat at this guy for all I know. This dude, he's like full-on movie guy where he's just like some thick Samoan dude in this comic book. The boats really compromise the movie. In the comic, less so, but they're still going to have trouble getting back to land, and they don't have a lot of reason to go back to land because their mission's already been a failure. They come across this Chinese vessel. There's bodies immediately found. They know that stuff's gone wrong, but they still climb onto this thing. I think there's a tendency to see this as their salvation, their redemption, particularly in the case of the captain. In the movie, this is much more pointed. We've already been told that Captain Donald Sutherland has sunk everything into what sank, and so he needs some kind of a win. In the movie, it's a Russian ship as opposed to a Chinese ship. Both times, though, they're nuclear. Both times, they're worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and even at a small percentage of that, all the crew stands to make $2-3 million if they can just get this ship to a port in Hawaii, I believe, in the case of the comic. I don't recall in the movie. I want to say they were headed for like New Zealand in the movie. In both the comic and the movie, once they turn on the power to the big ship, things just start happening. Poltergeist shit. An anchor from the big ship drops onto the little shit and essentially sinks it. One difference from the movie to the comic book is there's a dude who gets bisected by a cable. That would have been cool. We didn't get that in the movie. We just had the Pacific Islander guy have a leg injury. Nowhere near as grisly, nowhere near as cool. Now, a big difference in the comic book is the captain is knocked out, and I believe he's the one who has a fucked up leg, and so he's out of commission for a while. And because of his role in the book, he's very much Lieutenant Gorman from Aliens. He's the guy who's incompetent. Everybody's arguing with him. The mission goes to shit. He gets knocked out. Other people take charge. When he comes around again, there's a contentious relationship because things have already been getting better under the guidance of other people, and he just comes back to make problems again. Whereas in the movie, the Donald Sutherland captain guy, he's always shady as shit. People are constantly arguing with him the whole time. He's eventually discharged, essentially, and that eventually ends up leading him to doing bad deeds. As the lady character Foster is exploring the ship, she comes across the first of the biomechanoid creatures that are aboard. This is the thing depicted by Mike Plug on the cover, this sort of giant mosquito butterfly thing. Dragonfly, I guess, would probably be a better choice. And it chases her around with a camera. Averill, the male lead, knew what was going on because what the camera was capturing while he was following her was being broadcast on monitors elsewhere. So he comes with an axe and he kills the biomechanoid thing. They start finding more bodies, start wondering what the hell's going on, a little bit of turning on another. And then a big difference from the movie to the book is that a Chinese airship comes around and starts firing missiles at the big tanker, and the first issue ends with one of those missiles exploding against its side. A side note on Donald Sutherland. I was a little bit surprised a number of years back to realize that he was actually among my father's favorite actors. If you remember those big books of CDs that people used to own in the 90s, my father has a bunch of those, bigger but full of DVDs, and he actually has them separated by different performers and different franchises, and Sutherland related his own section. I think mostly due to his work in the movies The Dirty Dozen and Kelly's Heroes. I know he never liked MASH, he thought it was too grisly, and I don't think he liked the suicide aspect of that movie. Now you do have to take that with a grain of salt though, because he also, I believe, has sections for both Tom Berenger and Treat Williams based on their work in the Principal series, and I know he's got a Christopher Lambert section, largely owing to his work in the movie Gunman. But anyway, he likes the guy, but when I asked him about his recent passing, he wasn't exactly busted up about it because he never really invested in the man, just in some of his roles. He enjoyed his work, but the actual person wasn't a big thing for him. Now for me, I was first exposed to him in the 1978 version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Not my favorite version of that material. I like the original. And I saw that movie pretty young, probably too young for it. I did like it fairly well, but he's a little more intellectual than I could grapple with at that time. As far as he goes, besides his iconic final moments in the movie, the main thing I remembered about that was the bad perm. I'd see him and stuff here and there, but he was just one of those guys, that guy, My mom, she saw I believe in the late 80s, The Day of the Locust, and was traumatized by that movie. I think toward the end of the movie, Sutherland's character stomps an obnoxious little child actor to death. I never saw that one myself, but I did associate the actor with that occurrence because it was such a strong image that she put in my mind. The movie that really broke me through on Sutherland was actually Backdraft. I saw that theatrically. He played a compulsive arsonist, and he just was so excellent in that role. I loved how he's basically up for parole, and an arson inspector played by Robert De Niro is able to wheedle out of him his natural inclinations, his inability to not set fires and want to watch, I guess, the world burn in a Joker-esque fashion. And Sutherland did that thing that he does where he goes from a sane person to somebody who is clearly severely tweaked. He's always had one of the best smiles and glimmers in the eye in all of cinema. And so I really got turned on to him there. And I've enjoyed him in a bunch of stuff. And I went back and watched a lot of stuff from the 70s that he's known for. I don't think Sutherland ever got his props. He had moments where it looked like he would break through in a big way in the early 80s, again in the early 90s. I think after Backdraft, I don't think that was the only one who took notice of that, but JFK, of course, was another big one for him. But the dude just kind of had that tendency to take the paycheck. He just was in a lot of shit. And I think that because he didn't make a point of being pickier with his roles and finding showcases for himself, because he just enjoyed being a working actor, he was just in too much stuff that brought down his batting average. I do remember seeing him as Merrick from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. At one point, I watched my father's copy of The Puppet Masters, which, if the 78 Invasion isn't as good as the original, Puppet Masters isn't as good as the, Abel Ferrara did the one in the early 90s. Honestly, I'm not sure Puppet Masters was as good as Invasion. At least that had a fair amount of Nicole Kidman not wearing a bra. My father and I both saw Space Cowboys theatrically at his choosing. I was like, hey, you want to see a movie? And that's the one that he saw. I thought it was probably more to do with Clint Eastwood and Tommy Lee Jones, but of course the astronaut aspect, the space aspect, but apparently also the Donald Sutherland aspect. It's weird that probably Donald Sutherland's biggest role will end up being President Snow in the Hunger Games movies. I think that those movies probably are going to have a longevity because of the YA angle and just how big they hit in the culture. It's sort of like an Alec Guinness situation where I'm sure he'd rather be known for the bridge over the River Kwai, but of course he'll always be known as Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars instead. But I loved Donald Sutherland's presence. I especially loved his voice. I could hear him in commercials right up to the end of his life, and it always pleased me. It always gave me a warm sensation. As a kid of the 80s, obviously I was a big fan of his son, Kiefer Sutherland. The thing with Sutherland, though, is the son, is that his big thing was menace. He was always this menacing presence. He played great villains in the 80s and the early 90s. When he transferred into more heroic roles, particularly Jack Bauer in 24, that menace never fully left. He couldn't play both sides. He really should just have been a heavy for the rest of his career. I also am not a big fan of him as a lead actor. I think he's just better in supporting roles. I think Donald Sutherland should have had more leading roles in better movies. He just had a much greater range, and he's someone, even though he's played some of the worst people, some of the maddest madmen, you just love him and are drawn to him. He just has that incredible charisma, but he also has a warmth about him, and I'm going to miss his presence on the screen. By the way, in checking out his filmography, I did not realize, did you know they actually made a Backdraft 2 a few years ago? It looks like a total GTV piece of shit, but I'm still kind of wanting to check it out. I mean, they got Billy Baldwin back for that. Now, if they had managed to hook Jennifer Jason Leigh, it would be a done deal, but it's at least a possibility that I might watch Backdraft 2 at some point. Jump a couple of months to Dark Horse Insider number 14, cover dated February 1993. This is a very heavy month. We've got Predator Race War number 1, Terminal Point number 1. This is some kind of sci-fi book. I don't know what it's about. I think I might have read a copy at some point. It's one of those Bruce Zick things. This was definitely littering the quarter bins at one of my shops back in the day. Aliens Colonial Marines number 2, Aliens Hive softcover. This is the one with the Dave Dorman doggy cover. Aliens Tribes graphic story album softcover edition. A Small Killing graphic novel by Alan Moore and Oscar Zarate. The announcement of the Mr. Giggles contest winners. Concrete, the complete short stories, 1985 through 1989, second printing. We're at the end of Aliens vs. Predator 2 serialized. There's a preview for Aliens Rogue. There's a really nifty fan pinup, still making up of swipes, but nonetheless pretty cool. Full page is offered to it. It's basically a bunch of Dark Horse related characters up against the old chess piece. I'll be honest with you, I've always preferred the chess piece. The Wild Mare one never really did it for me. I wish they'd just kept the chess piece. So solicitation copy, Virus, number 2 of 4. It started out as the salvage job of a lifetime, but now Sean Averill and the crew of the ocean-going tug Electra have lost their ship and are stranded aboard the Chinese spy ship Wanchuan with a self-replicating computer virus from outer space. Where do you hide when the very ship you're on is alive and trying to kill you? Buy monthly, shipping February 23rd, 1993. As Virus number 2 starts, the Chinese airship is firing more missiles at the tanker, but the tanker has all these radars and is able to use microwaves to disable the missiles, and in fact redirects one of the missiles back to the airship and blows it up. out. So again, there's a clear indication that there's an intelligence aboard the ship that's protecting itself and apparently doing something to harvest the humans for unknown purposes. Most of this issue is further exploration, more encounters with the biomechanoids, but not a lot of deaths at this point. You do have the captain come back, and that disenfranchises Averill. So there's a whole sequence with him basically talking about how much trouble they're in and explaining, what a badass he is and how he should be in charge. And the mini-series is going to explain why that is the case, that he is 100% the man. And it's a pretty striking difference from the movie. William Baldwin is certainly a presence in the movie as the male co-lead, but he's really more of a supporting role. It's really clear that Jamie Lee Curtis is the star. She's the person who's positioned as the Ripley in this thing. And so while the female character is continuing to work with the male character throughout the issue, her contributions are fairly modest. So at the end of the issue, we find out that the captain has been compromised by the biomechanoid intelligence. He has all these wires sticking out of him. He kills the other female character, Malone, and converts her into a cyborg. And then when he's discovered, he starts tearing ass. But again, at the first comic shop, there was a dude who ended up doing the sports. We got on okay, but we just didn't have any interest in common. He was, your typical Italian machismo dude. I was a comics nerd who, over the course of being a comics retailer, became more socially adept, learned how to sell to people, also learned how to sell myself and have my own personality and be confident in my opinions without being a Sidney Mellon about things. Similar situation at the second comic shop. There was a dude who had been working there who was also going to school. Tall guy. Obviously, he's into the round ball and all that kind of the good stuff. Real nice dude, real friendly, real outgoing. But again, we just didn't have a lot in common. And where I may have been performative with the dudes I worked with initially at the first comic shop, I didn't even really try to do any of that kind of stuff with either of the sports guys because there just wasn't enough in common. We got along fine. We were friendly with each other, but there wasn't a lot of stuff that went on after hours. I think the only things I ever did with the second sports guy was I might have gone to his wedding, and we definitely both went to my partner's wedding. And one thing that was really nice of him is I at some point was talking about how much I wanted to see Alien Resurrection. At that time I was still an anti-Alien 3 person, and not only were we getting Ripley back, but she was being joined by my forever crush Winona Ryder, who I of course loved mostly from Heathers, but also her General Ovrah. And now she was going to be part of the Aliens franchise, so I was really excited for that. Again, 2 major women leads in a movie. And I guess he took that enthusiasm and was like, hey, you want me to give you a ride to the movie theater? The movie theater was not close to us at all. And I was like, yeah, sure, please. And dropped me off, and he had offered to come back and get me after the movie was done. I felt like that was too much of a burden. I just wasn't comfortable with that. So after the movie, I had to walk my happy little ass home several miles in the dark. Gave me a lot of time to think about that movie, which I'm sure will be addressed when we talk about it in fairly soon. Possibly next episode. We'll see how that goes. Now, once I had my own vehicle, I did that for plenty of other people. I paid it forward. I gave people rides, dropped them off, picked them up, that kind of stuff. Wasn't a big deal. Happy to do it. But at that time, it was meaningful to me that this person went out of their way to help me to do a thing that I wanted to do, and I appreciated that. Jumping to the April 1993 cover dated Dark Horse Insider number 16, featuring an Aliens Rogue painted cover. First issue's out this month, as is the 0 issue of Predator Race War. The first of 2 issues of Sex Warrior by Pat Mills, Tony Skinner, and Mike McCone. Inked by John Erasmus. I remember looking at this thing and not being super impressed. Obviously, a book called Sex Warrior would have piqued my interest at that time period, but I do think I read it, and I don't think it did much for me in any area. We've got Concrete Eclectica number 1 of 2, Paul Chadwick. Red Blade number 1 by Vince Giorano. I think we had a few of those in the quarter bin as well. The new Two-Fisted Tales book 1, $5 war anthology. Baseball Greats, the Harmon Killebrew story. I'm sure that was blazing out of the comic shop, or blazing into the card shop. Usually they were one or the other. You got RoboCop cover feature on Dark Horse Comics number 9. The serial is now Star Wars Tales of the Jedi. Ulick Kel Droma and the Beast Wars of Onderon, part 2 of 6 by Tom Veitch, Chris Gossett, and Mike Barrero. There's Nexus Book 1 softcover, covering the first 5 issues of the original Nexus Color stories. The Star Wars Dark Empire collection. Rio at Bay softcover collection by Doug Wildey, Western. The Hardboiled softcover collection by Frank Miller and Jeff Darrow. Dominion softcover collection, that's a Masmin Shiro deal. A preview of Accident Man by Mills, Skinner, and Duke Mighton with a cover by Howard Chaykin. That's another one that looked cool to me, but didn't really do much for me when I actually read it. From Dark Horse International, you've got the Aliens Volume 2 number 7 UK edition, Star Wars number 4, Aliens 6 as well, plus something called Lux and Albie, number 1 of 9. One of the most acclaimed and funniest British cutting-edge comics is now available in the US through Dark Horse. Described as a cross between Love and Rockets and the Infinity Gauntlet, Lux and Albie is the hilarious story of 2 lovable lowlifes who get caught in a cosmic conspiracy that leads from the streets of London to the gates of Nirvana. Written by cult novelist Martin Miller and drawn by hot new Scottish artist Simon Fraser, Lux and Albie combines an exciting storyline, great characters, and devastating humor in a unique and entertaining title that's guaranteed to build a loyal readership. Painted cover by Fraser, published by Acme Comics and distributed through Dark Horse. Advisory advisory, suggested for mature readers. This issue contains nudity, sexual scenes, and shoplifting. And this is a book that I don't think I ever saw in the wild. I think this was exclusively something I'd see in solicitation catalogs. Speaking of which, Virus, number 3 of 4. Trapped on a deserted Chinese radar ship adrift in the Pacific, Sean Averill and his companions are attacked by the biomechanical manifestations of an alien computer virus that views humans as nothing more than spare parts. The good news is that they've located the ship's armory, loaded with automatic weapons and explosives. The bad news is they're going to need them. Monthly, shipping April 27th, 1993. So at the top of Virus number 3, Averill, the alpha male, takes a gun and an axe to the captain and finally manages to disable him. But as soon as that's done, Malone, the female cyborg, gets up and she starts causing problems. Ultimately, they just run the fuck away. The crew keep fighting bigger and badder monsters. They do get a hold of a arsenal. There's an armory aboard the ship, so they've got plenty of guns, plenty of weapons, but it's only so effective against these increasingly large, increasingly complex, increasingly lethal creatures. So Malone climbs up onto an antenna to try to reactivate it. The goal is for the artificial intelligence or the alien intelligence that has taken control of the ship to broadcast off the ship and be able to essentially take over the world. Averill specifically recognizes the threat that poses, and so he's the one who manages to help shoot her off. Actually, it's the skinny guy that everybody treats contemptuously, ends up being a sharpshooter. It's the one major contribution he makes to the story. There's also a airship of some kind aboard the tanker. The crew is able to disable that, although it does eventually come to sort of life and they blow it up with a grenade. The issue ends with the skinny guy having gone off to do something and disappeared, and people are going looking for him. He's calling out to them. They follow his voice, and it turns out at the very end that it's just his severed head that's being articulated by the entity to lure them into a trap. It's a really grisly moment. There's some good gore in the movie, but there's not really a lot of horror. Like, it gets really grisly at times, but it's always offset by the more action sci-fi qualities of the story. This was a moment of really striking horror that should have been in the movie and was unfortunately not present. But it's also funny because it's really not strongly present in the original miniseries. It really does have more of an action tone to it. There's elements of horror. There's some fairly repugnant visuals, but really it's about the action element. It's just a dark action movie. And of course, you got that association between this dude and Alien, but also the one time we talked about comic books, there was one comic book that he actually enjoyed. He was around comics all the time. I think he tried stuff here and there, but only one book really resonated with him. It was his favorite comic book. He actually collected it and had a set. And in talking about it, he was like, hey, you want to read this? Especially, I guess, maybe this was, I don't know, this was before or after the Alien Resurrection thing, but he probably knew that was in my area of interest. So I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll read your copies of Iris. So I get the copies, I read the copies. This is the person's favorite comic of all time. And it's like, I found it like utterly unremarkable and tried as gently as possible to say, hey, thanks for that. Not really my bag, because I can't just be dishonest and, again, more socially adept and just say, oh yeah, that was great. Thanks for letting me read your comics. I have to be a critic and open my damn full mouth. But that was the only comic book this guy was really into. I read his comics, and I always felt like Virus was an instance of Dark Horse seeing an opportunity to try to map their own aliens. They'd made so much money off of these licensed properties, Aliens. They tried to do other things in that same sphere that weren't as successful, but none of that was theirs to own and control. And I believe that Virus was still owned by the screenwriter that conceived the notion, but they had a stake in it because they published the comics. If you watch the movie adaptation, at the very end, they have the old Dark Horse logo at the very end in like a gold with the chess piece. So you knew that they were involved. You know they had a piece of this. We have a big jump. So we previously discussed Dark Horse Insider number 16 from April. The miniseries concludes in number 21. It's so late that I had almost given up. I thought I was missing it or that it just had not gotten into the solicitations. This is a September cover date. So your bi-monthly book is ending after 5 months between issues 3 and 4. This one has a cover feature on The Vortex Week 1, Division 13 by Doug Monkey. There's also a one-page piece on the Vortex books as part of Comics Greatest World. Floaters number 1, which is from the short-lived Comics from Spike, as in Spike Lee. First issue of Aliens Labyrinth. First issue of Pumpkinhead by Gary Gianni and Sean McManus. I don't know if that was an adaptation or a continuation. We've got RoboCop Mortal Coils number 1 by Stephen Grant and Nick Nazzo. Covers by Ray Lago. This book is so late that we're on to another serial, Tales of the Mask Part 1 by John Arcudi and Rich Heaton with Jack Pollock. We're also on to version number 2.2, so we're in a whole other version, whatever the hell that was. Dark Horse Comics is running the splashback feature, Aliens. Martial Law Secret Tribunal number 1, so that's basically Martial Law versus Aliens. We covered that a while back. There's trade collections of RoboCop Prime Suspect, Take Girl Volume 1, the Compliot Aliens hardcover, the Ray Harryhausen Dinosaur Print Series number 1 of 2, Dark Horse International is offering Aliens Volume 2 number 14 and 15, Star Wars number 10, and Lux and Albie number 6 6 of 9. So again, we went from the solicitation of issue 1 to issue 6. Solicitation copy reads, Virus number 404. Sean Averill and the remaining crew of the Electra have had just about enough. They lose their cargo, their ship, and a lot of warm bodies to the virus. And all they've made out of the deal is a bad case of paranoia and a completely justified attitude against computers. But now they have automatic weapons. So everything should be fine, right? Wrong. The virus needs them too badly, and it needs them now. Monthly, quote unquote, shipping September 14th, 1993. So issue number 4, skinny guys no longer useful, so the creature throws its head at the humans. They run away, they try to seal themselves off. It's realized that this creature is going to probably have trouble with water. It's funny that it was broadcast onto a ship. Of course, it's important because it helps to isolate the creature or creatures. In the movie, the goal becomes to sink the ship to make sure that they bury this thing so that it can't do any harm to anyone else. In the comic book, it's a little bit different because the water that they're able to use for fighting fires aboard the ship, it's salt water. It's being pumped up from the sea. And so they have a fairly limitless amount if they want to just like drown the ship. And that's basically what they start to do because they know it's going to limit the ability of the intelligence to keep coming after them because it's going to have to divide itself and deal with the problem of the ship increasingly taking on water. The ultimate plan in the comic book is to use a missile to blow up part of the ship but leave a portion of it that they can float upon. And so it requires them to get to certain parts of the ship. Sigma male Averill, he wants to do everything by himself. Things only go wrong when people don't do what he tells them to do. The Pacific Islander guy, well-intentioned, doesn't do what he's told, ends up getting chopped in half. The ship does get blown in half. The last survivors are dude and chick. Against the laws of physics, the one giant prime alien intelligence is able to jump, I don't know, a quarter mile from one part of the ship to another part of the ship to continue to fight with our survivors. Oh, I think that the hooker guy, the guy who was steering the ship, he was still around because they wanted one more body. He, of course, gets chopped in half too. In a bit of a twist, I believe it's the girl who manages to trigger the anchor, which ends up catching the biomechanoid and grinding it within the framework of the anchor, like the chains, the channel by which the chains goes out. So it's shredded before it even gets into the water again. But apparently all kinds of different nations were on the lookout for this ship. They knew that something had gone wrong, even if the Chinese had tried to keep quiet. Luckily for our presumably American crew, an American helicopter comes for them, picks them up, takes them away to safety. But at the very end, we see a floppy disk floating on the water. So apparently the alien intelligence will probably remain in the floppy disk as a threat to the world. Things were a little bit different in the movie. Obviously, Jamie Lee Curtis had a lot more to do. She was the one who was butting heads with the captain, at least as much, if not more, than the William Baldwin character. There's a Russian scientist that's helping them throughout the movie. The movie actually has a prelude that shows a satellite, a Russian satellite, I believe it was Mir, get taken up by this electrical storm that's then destroys the satellite, or at least compromises the satellite, kills the human crew on the satellite, and then broadcasts to the receiving ship. And then, of course, it slowly makes its way through the ship. The Russian lady scientist was the wife of the sea captain, who is one of the creatures that comes after them. Special effects in the movie are pretty good. There are some moments, though, where it's clear that this is a mannequin on a treadmill or on treads or whatever. There are definitely some major moments of 90s lighting. One of the major criticisms of the movie is that it functions, but there's nothing about it that really sets it apart. It feels like a guy who had come up in special effects was the guy who directed this thing. It's notoriously Jamie Lee Curtis's most hated movie of her career. She shit-talked it on the extras of a whole other movie, saying it was the biggest piece of shit she ever made. I don't think it's that bad, but there are also defenders who say good things about it. It's really not that good. I found it to be boring. I struggled to finish the movie. I'd already decided to do Virus for Donald Sutherland Pass. I thought it might be nice if I could use this as something of a tribute, but I'm not going to get a lot of tribute material out of fucking Virus, let me tell you. Oh, and there's this whole nonsense thing toward the end of the movie where they capture her character to interrogate her, and people have drawn parallels between that sequence and the sequence in Alien 3 where the alien is coming right up to Ripley, but of course it's explained in the movie why that's possible, why the drone doesn't just kill her. There isn't really a good explanation for why the same sequence happens in this movie, aside from it's just super derivative. Everything about this movie is a ripoff. The comic itself, it's basically what if the Thing was Runaway, and this is written by a guy who wrote the Thing comic book. So a lot of sources kept talking about how the screenplay was written and it was decided that it would be too expensive to make this movie. I think it was more a situation where there wasn't really anything innate in this movie to make it worth the trouble and expense. And then a few years later, as special effects and particularly CGI became more accessible, somebody greenlit it. But this definitely should not have been a $70-odd million movie. They knew that. That's why it went from being a summer tentpole in 1998 to the January 1995 dumping ground, and it ended up only making half its money back. People will tell you, or it has its fans, they call it a cult following. I don't know how a $70 million movie can have a cult following, but There are people who like it, I think probably because of the girl power elements, because you have two female leads. Okay, a female lead in a major supporting role for female characters in the movie. And you've got, they're the ones who are deciding most of the action. They're the alpha females. It stands in stark contrast to the comic book where it's all about the bro, the dude who knows everything and is smarter than everybody, is fun, and fights harder and is more resilient and just is better than everything than everybody. Part of the reason why I found the comic book so tedious the first time. At least you have a female-fronted action sci-fi horror movie with a good budget out there. It's just not a particularly good one. Also, they do not sexualize Jamie Lee Curtis's character or the Russian female scientist character, which I think is progressive, but I think it maybe hurt putting asses in seats, and especially poor Jamie Lee Curtis. She just get her ass beat over the course of this movie. She's looking real damn rough by the end of this thing. I respect that they had the courage to do that. A little hard for a fellow to watch, though. So if you thought the gap between the first and last issue of Virus was bad, the first issue was listed in Dark Horse Insider number 12. The collected edition was solicited in number 41, cover dated May 1995. This is the same issue with the Alien Superman cover by Dan Jurgens and Kevin Nolan. I will point out that Comics by Spike is still a thing at this point. They're still doing the Colors in Black miniseries, issue 304. You got the release of Visions, The Art of Arthur Sidum, Aliens vs. Predator War number 1, a Godzilla trade paperback second edition to go along with the release of Godzilla number 0, an interview with Igor Cordy on Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan, A Tale of Mugambi, Star Wars River of Chaos number 1 by Louise Simonson and Jude Brigman. That'd be your Power Pack team. And Jude Brigman was at the con as well. Didn't make it to her table though. Mecha Special number 1, launch of Gunsmith Cats by Kinichi Sonata. Okay, I'm not going to read through the solicitation copies because very much like the Virus Creatures, they just cobbled this together from previous solicitations to give it new life. But the Virus trade paperback collection, advanced solicitation, shipping June 13th, 1995. Introduction by noted science fiction author Robert Sheckley, $16.95 US, $23.75 Canada. That's a weird price point. ISBN 1-56971-104-6, 136 color pages, square bound, color cover. And once again, it's the same Mike Plug mosquito butterfly mechanoid thing that's been in all the other copy. I don't think this is what was actually on the cover though, or at least not the cover that I've seen a bunch of times. Yeah, instead it's basically the same creature, but in a more extreme close-up. And I don't know if this is Mike Plug artwork. It actually kind of looks like maybe it was a Howard Cobb design or something, but it's actually a little bit sleeker, a little cleaner, but not super interesting. I like the Plug monsters on these covers, but they're not very strong as individual images because all it is a drawing of the creature. There's no context for it, so they sort of run together to me. I haven't talked much about the artist, Howard Cobb, because there's only so much to tell. I thought his work looked nice, with occasional bits of intense detail, but other times a bit sparse with awkward angles. I thought his influences were atypical, with Russ Heath being called to mind. Sure enough, his earliest art training was copying from Sergeant Rock and Enemy Ace comics in the 1960s during his childhood in Canada. As a teen in the 70s, he studied theater in Calgary and film and television production at Brigham Young University in Utah. He met his wife there, and they dropped out when she got pregnant with the first of 7 children, returning to Canada because they couldn't afford to have a baby in the States. Cobb briefly worked as a milkman, but thanks to his background in oil painting, started getting work doing portraits and commercial art. In local gallery circles, he was properly introduced to watercolors, loved the speed with which it allowed him to express himself, and started doing shopping mall showings that were successful. That took him through the 80s, but he started to burn out, and he never quit drawing comic book material in his sketchbooks. Cobb never mentions any comic artists by name, but I see a lot of early Mike McCone in his work, a little Paul Gulacy, but most especially an obscure Australian artist named Glenn Lumsden, who had been working on Puppet Master comics for eternity around this same time period. Cobb put a portfolio together, but location was still a major consideration in the 1990s, and there wasn't much of a Canadian industry. He finally got a heavily photo-referenced backup story in an issue of the Innovation Quantum Leap series. This led him to being tapped by Dark Horse for Virus, which had a significant production delay that caused the 4-issue miniseries to take 10 months to be released. He got another chance with the 2-part Predator serial Blood on Two Witch Mesa for Dark Horse Comics number 20-21, and another for The Machine Under My Skin in that book's last issues. Plus he was promised some Marvel work, but by then it was late 1994 and the industry was in free fall. Cobb blamed his inability to network from Canada, which surely contributed, but also he was a fairly slow artist with an outdated style who's competing with the actual Russ Heath for work on the same anthology title. Heath was doing James Bond. Having been out of the fine art game for a few years and with kids to feed, he moved on to being a hardwood flooring contractor. Luckily, he made friends with a Hollywood costume designer and worked with her on productions like Underworld, Hellboy, Silent Hill, and Resident Evil. After retiring as a contractor with the kids grown, Cobb was finally able to return to fine art painting, which he still seems to be doing today. He refuses to do portraits or animals, favoring landscapes, with commissions ranging from $700 to $3,000 if you're interested. Okay, so by the time they came out with the second edition, edition of the Virus trade paperback, Dark Horse Insider was no longer a thing, or maybe it was just the one-sheet version that made, the little poster version. They say publication date was April 1st, 1998. I definitely don't buy that because they always on the website default to the first day of the given month. The new cover was by John Bolton. It's painted. That's the artwork that I used for the album art, since that makes the project fit closer to Aliens by having John Bolton's put his official stamp, that signature style that's so associated with those early Aliens miniseries, and of course the rebranded versions where they renamed everything in the mid-90s. This one also has the blurb on the cover, the story behind the major motion picture, which is funny because this would have come out in the summer, I suppose, of 98. The actual movie doesn't come out until January of 99. Many people consider 1999 to be the greatest year in cinematic history, not because of Virus, especially not in a January dumping ground. The back cover has a photograph, I think, from the movie. It seems like it, but it's, yeah, I think that's Jamie Lee Curtis. It's a little fuzzy for me. I'm looking on the internet. Virus. A seagoing tug in the Pacific Ocean, a hard-bitten crew, a complacent captain, a tough engine room officer. These are the core cast. After barely weathering a great storm, they come upon a Chinese warship adrift on the seas. Investigating, they find all the crew dead or missing. The ship is ripe for salvage, if they can get away with it before the Chinese catch up with them. But that turns out to be the least of their worries, for there is something aboard that ship, something that is not human. Quote, stories like Virus have a headlong pace. They can't be surpassed for their compact, never-stop action and in-your-face menace. Taken from the introduction by Robert Sheckley. I'm not a big sci-fi guy, so I wasn't familiar with Sheckley. According to Wikipedia, he was an American writer, first published in the science fiction magazines of the 1950s. His many quick-witted stories and novels were famously unpredictable, absurdist, and broadly comical. Nominated for Hugo and Nebula Award, Sheckley was named Author Emeritus by the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America in 2001. He passed away toward the end of 2005. I don't own a copy of the trade paperback. I wasn't going to buy it for this project, and unfortunately I could not find a copy anywhere online. I'm not aware of Virus having too much in the way of heat on it, but if you look online, you can find a set of the miniseries signed by Jimmy Palmiotti, certified to have been signed on May 17th, 1993 at the South Bay Comic Exchange, Redondo Beach, California. The set's going for $12 on eBay. And actually, now that I look closer, it's only 3 of the 4 issues. From the Goodreads blurb, Chuck Pfarrer, author of 13 books with 19 followers, is a former assault element commander of SEAL Team 6. He has written op-eds for the New York Times and the Knight Ridder Syndicate, and appeared as an author and counterterrorism expert on C-SPAN 2, NPR, Al Hurrah, IPR, Voice of America, Fox News, and America Tonight. Pfarrer serves presently as an associate editor of The Counterterrorist, the American Journal of Counterterrorism. Pfarrer is the author of the bestsellers SEAL Target Geronima, The Inside Story of the Mission to Kill Osama bin Laden, and Warrior Soul, The Memoir of a Navy SEAL. His Hollywood credits include writing and producing work for Navy SEALs, Dark Man, Hard Target, The Jackal, Virus, and Red Planet. He lives in Michigan. I'm going to be a bum here and just read the Wikipedia page. It'll save us all some trouble. On the bright side, at least I'm a human being doing the reading. I'm not going to kick it over to a robot like I would on the Terminator podcast. Chuck Pfarrer initially wrote Virus as a screenplay and pitched it to Universal Studios, who rejected Pfarrer's pitch. Pfarrer, liking the underlying concept, contacted Mike Richardson of Dark Horse Comics, for whom Pfarrer had previously written a comic book sequel to John Carpenter's The Thing. Richardson agreed to publish Virus as a comic book miniseries, which was a great success, with all 4 issues attaining sales of 100,000 copies per issue. Pfarrer then took Virus to producer Gail Ann Hurd, and the two of them returned to Universal, who are now eager to do the film. After co-directing parts of the T2 3D Battle Across Time at the request of James Cameron, who's preoccupied with Titanic at the time, John Bruno was contacted by Universal Pictures following the success of the attraction with an offer to direct Virus with Gail Ann Hurd as producer. Bruno read the script by Pfarrer and didn't like it, and also read the Dark Horse comics that was expanded from the script and was initially planning to pass on the film. Following his dives with Cameron to the Titanic, Bruno began to see the possibilities in making Virus work, such as changing the vessel from being Chinese to Russian and incorporating a hurricane as a plot device after experiencing the inner workings of Russian vessels and hurricanes during the Titanic voyages. After taking some advice from Cameron to change the film so he liked it, Bruno left Titanic after finding a replacement and agreed to direct the film, provided he could make the requested changes. An international co-production film between the United States, United Kingdom, Japan, France, and Germany. The film was mostly shot in Newport News, Virginia, on a ship anchored in the James River. A horizontal bar on the ship was raised and lowered to conceal the horizon line, making it appear the ship was far out at sea. It was actually a U.S. Navy vessel that had been retired and was in pretty bad shape. They had to clean it up, or at least half of it they cleaned up so they could use it for filming. The other half they just sort of covered up and tried not to shoot if they could avoid it. They intentionally damaged an antenna array on the ship as essentially a real-life special effect for the movie. And then in 2009, the ship was sunk to create a coral reef. It still had the Cyrillic lettering from the movie. So as you do with Dark Horse novelizations, S.T. Perry was the one who took the comic and the screenplay and turned it into into a book. There's also a line of action figures that were actually pretty freaking gnarly. I don't remember seeing them back in the day. Watching videos of talking about them online. They were apparently by Resource, who I'm not familiar with. They made figures of the characters of Foster, Baker, Richie, Captain Everton, Captain Alexei, Squeaky, and the Goliath Machine, which came with a Nadia figure. Nadia was the Russian scientist character that was invented for the film. What was cool is that the characters that had been taken over by the virus, their default form was the jacked up version, but you could apply pieces to them to make them look human again, so you could have them devolve later on. Also, they had early examples of a Build-A-Figure, from what I could tell. There's also a video game, Virus It Is Aware, by Cryo Interactive for the Sony PlayStation. I watched a playthrough of this. It's funny because it's a very glitchy game. It's a very difficult game with a tendency to have creatures drop down on you and come up at you and just really cheats the player. Very difficult game, apparently. Very maddening. It's fun watching players get frustrated trying to play this thing, do game run-throughs. And again, since the movie was such a big flop, they never actually brought Virus to the States. One of the most amusing bits of merch available for Virus, there was apparently a limited edition compact disc along the lines. I think it was a compact disc. It might have been one of those little mini disc things like they did for Final Fantasy The Spirits Within, but it looked like one of those AOL kind of things. It was a screensaver tied into the movie that you could put on your computer. I could see where that wouldn't go over very well though, because I think most people, especially in 1999, were very anti-virus, and they probably would not want to install a thing called a virus onto their computer regardless of how benign it may have ultimately been. But it's also worth noting that a lot of those screensavers and apps that people were putting on their computers in that time period were pretty shoddily put together, had exploits, and I understand that a lot of times hackers were able to get into people's computers through programs like that. It would be sort of ironic if you got a virus from a desktop wallpaper disk called Virus. It's funny you had that blurb in Wikipedia about the success of Virus. Don't have a lot of sales numbers, but what I'm seeing is that issue number 3 at Chromacron was the 205th ranking in units, but because of the $2.50 price, it came up to 92nd place in dollars, so I guess in that way it was a top 100 book. Seems like a bit of a stretch there. And the direct market took only 30,000 copies, so I'm guessing maybe the first issue got to 100,000 copies, which again would not be significant numbers, especially for the 90s. I mean, this is 1993, the year the market tanked, but you can still do a damn sight better than that. I'd like to go into more detail, but unfortunately, 92 and 93 still have a lot of gaps to them on Comic-Con, and frankly, if I have any gap fillers with my materials here at the house, I'm not going to go digging for them to determine virus numbers. If number 3 sold 30,000 copies, I'm sorry, I don't really consider that a raging success. I felt like I needed a break episode. Again, I'm still trying to burn through a lot of the stuff that I don't feel like I can do once the show goes bi-monthly next year. I feel like if you're waiting 2 months, you can reasonably expect Aliens and or Predator content. So while I have the opportunity, I want to do Dark Horse Presents a few other things. And because of those associations with Aliens and with Dark Horse, and the simple fact that I went to Heroes Con and preparing for that was exhausting. The actual con was exhausting. It was also very enriching. It was a great time. Had a blast. Loved meeting everybody. Loved art commissions I got, books that I got, stuff that might feed into future podcasts. But I'm just tired, and this episode is definitely going to be late. It's just barely going to come out at the end of the month to keep up the 3+ years of monthly service in the Dark Horse Presents podcasting category. But it will come out. It will probably be a little bit on the short side. Probably not a huge amount of interest in Virus as a property, but that's what I'm doing, and I hope you enjoy it.
The 100-Handed Pod, Andrew R., the Arctic Artist, Billet Spy Vinyl, Billy Hines, Comics Enabler, who added of the Aliens Havoc episode, ooh, I like this one, great comic. And who's that charming guest this month? Well, I'm intrigued, Bob at Mega Thumbzilla, Chris Dunford, who added, yeah, indeed, referencing a piece of art from social media related to Havoc. Chris Lydon, Comics and Such, Dead End Kid, who wrote, I have tried in vain to dig up any press or interviews with Sienkiewicz about a river in Egypt. Last year, in a fit of e-nostalgia, got that, and Renee French's The Ninth Land, and Prosser and Panda Brothers' Exquisite Corpse, as well as Silicon Horizon by Richard Forges. I always wondered if it was just a riff that he couldn't see sustaining or what, but the ink struck me when I was a teenage runaway, and they've stuck with me to this day. The splash pages on those 2 installments live in my head as high watermarks. David N., Derek W.C. of History of Comics on Film, Dirk Ashton, Ed Moore Teal Productions, Fabio Morer, Lex Mortis, Geek Gem, Glitchy Jinx, Al Colbeck, I Was Joe Was, The Irredeemable Shag, JMT Productions, Julia Raoul, Keith G. Baker, Lamar the Revenger, Lorenzo Sleestack, Meme Stealing Raccoon, Miguel Quiros, Petrus Gaspard, The Semi-Skeptic Podcast, Siskoid, Superbound, Talk Nerdy to Me, Tatiana DeFries, This Is Not the End, and William Lange.
This has been a Rolled Spine podcast. All audio samples are believed covered under fair use laws. No copyright infringement is intended.